for being here. I'm honored to serve as chair of this important subcommittee, and I look forward to working with my colleague, Ranking Member Kane from Virginia, to ensure our Navy has the ships and resources they need. Both of us, the Navy is very significant to both of us. First off, I want to introduce our witnesses. We're joined by three experts in the state of our nation's naval shipbuilding, starting with Dr. Brett Seidle, who serves as the Acting Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development and Acquisition, and is responsible for the overall management for shipbuilding programs. Nice, easy time. Next is Vice Admiral James Downey, who serves as the commander of the Naval Sea Systems Command, providing technical direction, contracting authority, construction oversight, and other critical functions for Navy shipbuilding. And finally, Shelby Oakley, who is the Director for Contracting and National Security Acquisitions at the Government Accounting Office, where she has received our shipbuilding efforts. He has reviewed our shipbuilding efforts extensively. Thank you again for being here, and thank you for your service to our country. So many of you have heard me talk about my father. My dad, I'm blessed. I have my adopted dad. He was crazy. He joined the Army very young, underage. He was one of 3,000 Americans that did all 4 combat jumps in the Second World War. I think he got paid more to do jumps. He thinks about 80 out of 80 people came back alive. He told me the Germans were bad, the foxholes were bad, the food was bad, so I joined the Navy. But I'm proud he did all 4 combat jumps with the 82nd Airborne that they did, and then fought in the Battle of the Bulge. I thought the food was going to be better, but it was really not very great. I served as radar man aboard the USS Glover. I'm proud to be a Navy veteran, but we can all acknowledge that it is facing significant challenges and in need of a turnaround. President Trump has made clear that his administration is focused on making our military the lethal fighting force it should be, and I'm glad we have a president focused on this. In the past few years, unfortunately, we've seen the Navy failing to recruit, pass the audit, and most relevant to our discussion today, deliver ships on time and on budget. In the last 5 years, 41 ships were delivered to the Navy. Of those 41 ships, only 4 were delivered on time and on budget. That's 9.7%. So I'm a business guy. I build businesses. No one would consider less than 10% success acceptable. In the private sector, something would have changed. You wouldn't keep using the same company. The company would probably go bankrupt. You clearly changed people out. Yet over the past 4 years, we've seen the Navy failing to improve ships, innovate, or deliver things on time and on budget. As a failure to the American people, expect their federal government to use their tax dollars wisely and expect their Navy to be on the cutting edge of innovation to defend our national security. We clearly have to make some changes. I think my colleague, Senator Kane, is in the same position. We want to do everything we can to help with a turnaround, and we got to do it fast. In today's subcommittee on seapower hearing, we will provide oversight on our Navy's conventional surface shipbuilding efforts, see why our naval readiness and shipbuilding are falling behind Communist China, and understand how we can work to rapidly change course. I have serious concerns about the challenges to our maritime dominance. The United States is losing ground, unfortunately, to Communist China and naval power, and our shipbuilding enterprise is failing to keep up. Communist China Navy has 370 ships and submarines with over 150 major surface combatants, and they continue to pioneer innovative designs like large unmanned surface vessels and carriers for unmanned aircraft. In contrast, the United States has failed to capitalize its naval shipbuilding since Ronald Reagan led the production surge over 4 decades ago. Our surface combatant fleet is growing old, with the average age of our ships exceeding 20 years. Meanwhile, programs intended to modernize our force have completely failed. The cruiser replacement program, the Little Combat Ship, the Zumwalt-class destroyers, this failure to modernize forced us to restart production of older DDG-51 Arleigh Burke-class ships as a temporary fix, even though these ships were already desperately in need of innovation to begin with. What's even more concerning is that we don't seem to be learning from our mistakes or taking any significant steps to improve the process. Take the Constellation-class frigate, once intended as an affordable and mature design, as a glaring example of our ongoing challenges. A recent GAO report attributed the program's failures to an immature design with constant weight growth and slow approval processes that have delayed the lead ship by at least 3 years. This crisis extends beyond combatant ships. Our logistics and support fleet, including oceanographic ships, towing and salvage ships, and fleet oilers suffer from the same systemic failures. The common thread here is ships aren't being delivered on time, they are way over budget, and too often they aren't what we wanted. We're past the time for gradual change. We need to take immediate, bold, transformative action to change how the Navy acquires ships in the entire design and building process. If we don't, we're going to continue falling behind our adversaries. The stakes could not possibly be higher. Communist China, unfortunately, their government has chosen to be our enemy, and it's our job to ensure the United States Navy has the tools and ships it needs to be ready for whatever may come. Throughout today's hearing, I ask our witnesses to put all options on the table, because if we do not act decisively, the United States risks being a second-rate naval power, unable to defend our interest or deter aggression in an increasingly dangerous world. I'd now like to recognize Ranking Member Kane for his comments.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, and thanks to all the witnesses and everybody who's here to talk about this important topic. I look forward to working together as your ranking member in this subcommittee, and you're right that both of us personally, you as a Navy veteran and me as the father of a Marine, but also because of our state's equities, care very deeply about the seapower mission. I'll acknowledge the same thing that I acknowledged at the hearing last year, that the hearing takes place during an extraordinary time for the U.S. Navy, and let's start with some positives. Attacks continue on commercial ships in the Red Sea. That's not a positive, but our nation's sailors have demonstrated a absolutely remarkable ability to defend key shipping lanes that permit global commerce, battling back against a heavy arsenal of attacks from the Houthis, and we appreciate the bravery of the women and men who sail into those waters and the skill and competence that they've shown over the last many months. But we know that the Navy today is not operating at readiness levels to match the threats we face around the world. We had the hearing in the full committee 2 weeks back. The Vice Chief basically said that we have an 80% readiness standard for ships and subs. It's somewhat complex the way that what that metric means, but the bottom line is we're at about 62% to the 80 on surface ships, 67% to the 80 on subs. We've seen some improvement in maintenance, but on the construction side, we're not where we need to be. Given the change in administrations, the first year of the administration, we never get the budget in February, so we don't have the budget request for FY26. So I can't yet comment upon how that budget might address the issue of readiness. But we're here today to discuss the state of the industrial base that supports the conventional Navy, how the Navy is supporting the base, and what we need to do to support it in the future. The Navy's industrial base is not in great shape. I don't say any of that to attack either the Navy witnesses, or the industrial base. We have fantastic innovators, but bottom line, for a series of reasons, whether it's supply chain challenges, workforce challenges, inflation, not sufficient attention to the way to allocate the work among those with the capacity to do it, we're not meeting our needs. Despite the best efforts of your predecessors, we have watched as the performance in Navy shipbuilding has degraded across the portfolio. And we know that the pacing threat from the Navy is much more stressing than this everyday threat that we're seeing in the Red Sea. The Indo-Pacific and other theaters have critical challenges for us. There are some success stories. The amphibious warship and destroyer productions are moving forward apace, but Virginia-class sub, Columbia-class sub, the frigate program that the chair mentioned, and others, we've got real issues. I am a member of the Health, Education, and Labor Pension Committee, and I'm sort of particularly focused on workforce challenge. And I will just state up front, I'm a little bit worried on the supply chain side and the cost side, what a regime of comprehensive tariffs against products around the world will do to the cost of some of the inputs that could make this matter even tougher. There are areas where money is going to be needed, but there's also areas where more money is not going to be enough to make the difference, or at least not enough of one fast enough to meet the needs that we have, and so it's a matter of doing things better. And so we have to be open to new approaches, admit what we have been doing needs to change and improve if we want a better outcome. Ms. Oakley, the GAO report that you issued recently, it was long, but my punchline was if we keep doing the same thing we've been doing and expect that the results will magically be better, we're living in a fantasy world. We're not going to get better results unless we're willing to embrace change. So I look forward to the discussion today with the chairman and our colleagues, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Now we'll hear from Dr. Seidle.
Thank you. Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Kane, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, good afternoon. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to be here today to address the state of conventional U.S. shipbuilding. I am currently the Acting Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, and prior to assuming this role in January, I spent half my career in the private sector leading manufacturing organizations for General Motors and Alcoa. The other half of my career has been spent leading the Naval Research and Development Establishment, and since arriving in D.C. in 2020, I've also spent time serving as the Executive Director of NAVSEA 04, leading our nation's public shipyards. First and foremost today, I fervently believe our Navy has never been more important than it is right now. The United States projects its presence around the globe via our Blue Water Navy, impacting geopolitical decisions on a daily basis and helping to maintain our way of life. Leading in the Navy has resulted in a very purpose-driven life for me, and I believe it's a mission that resonates with all of us who serve. That mission, ensuring the men and women of the armed services come home safely, that our sailors and Marines are never in a fair fight, is both motivational and inspirational for myself and the rest of our acquisition team. I mentioned recently that we have fielded the finest Navy ever assembled in the history of the world, and I believe that is still true yet today. Our Navy's performance these past 3 years has been, in a word, outstanding, delivering on engagements from the Red Sea to the Western Pacific, and I have been proud to be a part of the team that helps make that possible. And for the men and women of this body and the thousands of employees who make up our acquisition, enterprise, and industrial partners, you have my heartfelt thanks for delivering on that performance. But today, I have a bounce in my step for another reason, because not only do we have to perform militarily, but we are also in an economic battle with our adversaries. Nations build wealth when they build products, and strong manufacturing base is key to economic buildup. Today, we once again recognize the need to reinvigorate and awaken the industrial might of our nation, and I can think of no better place to start than our shipbuilding enterprise. I truly am more excited about this challenge than anything I've been involved in during the past 40 years, and it is way past time that we get after it. I have been asked if it's just too hard to find people that want to do the work of shipbuilding, that the work is too difficult, too hot, too cold, too dirty. I find that assertion to be patently false. The human condition is the same as when I was a kid. People want a fair wage. They want to be respected for the work that they perform. They want to have a mission they support that's bigger than their life, and I think supporting our Navy checks all those boxes. I have visited our shipyards, and it was confirming of my beliefs, and rather than being discouraged, I come away emboldened from what I saw. Because there I met industrial partners and leaders I respect, employees who were passionate about our Navy and their role in supporting this country, and I also saw latent capacity that can be tapped to make a real difference. Having said all the above, we clearly have significant challenges in our shipbuilding enterprise. Simply put, we need more ships delivered on time and on budget, and we are challenged in both of these arenas. Costs are rising faster than inflation, and schedules on multiple programs are delayed 1 to 3 years late. We need increased modernization, infrastructure investment, better workforce hiring and retention, and improved supply chain performance. And my commitment to this body is that our industrial partners and I, with your strong continued support, plan to get after these issues and will behave as if the fight is tonight. I also believe the relationship between this Navy, this body, and our industrial partners is central to our success and solving the problems already mentioned. In each of these 3 groups, individuals get up every day, passionate about solving the problems in front of us, with similar goals and aspirations, albeit different perspectives. And in that vein, this committee has my passionate commitment to be an outstanding partner, to look forward and drive change, to build the connective tissue with our industrial partners instrumental to our success, and to reinvigorate our manufacturing base to drive the economic engine of this country. I am genuinely excited to be here today and look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Vice Admiral Downey.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Kane, distinguished members of the Seapower Subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Navy's conventional surface shipbuilding programs. I would first like to thank the committee for its candid perspectives and determination to help the Navy accelerate the delivery of combat power to the fleet. Recent testimony before Congress, including testimony and reports from my GAO colleague, Ms. Oakley, have been integral in supporting the Navy's routine communication with Congress regarding the complex realities of shipbuilding in 2025. As the commander of Naval Sea Systems Command, I am privileged to lead a team charged with translating warfighter requirements into combat capability, enabling our nation and its allies to provide persistent presence in peace, project power in war, and assured access at all times. Our focus is on getting our ships and their warfighting systems designed, delivered, and maintained to meet global national security requirements. With any project, and certainly one as complex as shipbuilding, judicious planning is what establishes the foundation for successful execution. As the technical authority for our ships and related systems, NAVSEA is committed to appropriately evaluating costs, schedule, and technical requirements to deliver the right capabilities to our warfighters, recognizing that requirements discipline plays a quintessential role in shaping a program for success. As a best practice, the Navy procures approximately 50% of our surface force to primarily commercial standards. For our combatant programs, with more stringent build requirements, we continually review our military specifications and are committed to doing so collaboratively alongside industry to simplify and streamline wherever possible. We are also actively transitioning design plans into digitized formats, reducing the burden on the shipbuilder. Similarly, we are committed to working alongside industry to ensure our contracts and acquisition strategies are aligned and balanced to the specific procurement need. We continue to face mounting challenges, from shifting demographics and workforce shortages to supply chain disruptions that collectively continue to pressurize our shipbuilding contracts. We need strategic solutions to improve waterfront productivity, and we are evaluating contracting approaches and incentives while also centralizing that data to better access what levers are needed to improve shipbuilding performance. In program execution, our supervisors of shipbuilding provide the on-site technical and contractual oversight for the construction of Navy vessels at our major private shipyards. As of today, the Navy has 92 ships under contract, with 56 ships actively in construction. In addition to these prime shipbuilding contracts, we also have a number of yards that outsource large components, resulting in a more distributed shipbuilding model with somewhat more complex oversight required. With the assistance of this committee, we now have a dedicated deputy commander within NAVSEA overseeing our waterfronts and improving communications and coordination across all of our shipbuilding projects to better deliver capability at the speed and scale of need. When you visit the shipyards and speak to the workers, whether it's welders, machinists, front office staff, or engineers, you understand what it means to them to build a great ship from the keel up, to start with nothing and then to deliver a fully capable warship. That's the product of teamwork in its purest form of execution. This shipbuilding culture, which in some communities goes back generations, is what we focus on cultivating and nurturing. Continuing to do so will require competitive wages, as well as affordable housing, quality schools, and other supporting functions for the shipyard workers. NAVSEA is deeply committed to helping industry create productive and safe workspaces on the waterfront in order to attract and retain the skilled workforce we need to build the Navy our nation requires. And so I thank Congress for these investments in our shipbuilding programs, because these efforts will not only help stabilize production, but will enhance the maritime industry for future generations. I am committed to transparently working in close collaboration with this Congress and industry to meet the Navy's 4 structure goals. Thank you again for this opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Admiral. Ms. Oakley.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Kane, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the ongoing challenges facing Navy surface shipbuilding and the solutions that could help turn things around. Let's start with the hard truth. Despite the Navy's shipbuilding budget nearly doubling over the past 2 decades, the size of its fleet hasn't grown. The Navy had roughly the same number of ships in 2003 as it does today, even though it has spent billions trying to expand. In addition, almost every surface ship is now significantly delayed. Meanwhile, our strategic competitors are rapidly building and deploying modern, highly capable fleets. The Navy simply cannot afford to continue with business as usual. For over 20 years, GAO has been reporting that the Navy's approach to shipbuilding is fundamentally flawed. We've issued 90 recommendations since 2015 alone, yet more than 60 of them remain unaddressed. And the consequences of inaction are clear: billions in cost overruns, years of schedule delays, ships that ultimately don't provide expected capability. The biggest driver of the outcomes we see are the unrealistic business cases that the Navy puts forward to support its shipbuilding programs. These business cases don't adequately reconcile what can actually be done within available resources, including technology, design knowledge, industrial-based capacity, and funding. As a result, the Navy's budget requests are founded on optimism to secure funding. Later, as business cases deteriorate and realism sets in, challenges that were predictable from the start begin to emerge. Yet the Navy continues to push forward, awarding contracts for ships that likely can't be built with the resources available. As a result, they arrive later than planned and cost far more than expected. The LCS and DDG-1000, among others, stand out as prominent prior examples of this dynamic. The question is, has the Navy learned from these past mistakes? To some extent, yes. Recent efforts incorporating more proven systems and increasing engagement with industry before contract award are steps in the right direction. But old habits die hard. Take the frigate program, for example. The Navy has already put 6 ships under contract, despite the fact that 2 key systems remain unproven and design changes have led to weight growth that threatens performance. Now, over 2 years in, construction on the lead ship has effectively stalled, with delivery delayed by at least 3 years. This isn't just a minor hiccup. It's indicative of a system where providing a capable ship to the fleet on a time is given less priority than protecting the program budget and keeping money flowing to underperforming programs under the guise of stabilizing the industrial base. This approach directly threatens the Navy's ability to meet its long-term force structure goals that rely on large numbers of frigates. You might ask, is this scenario simply unavoidable? Is Navy shipbuilding just irreparably broken? The answer is no, but the Navy must break the cycle. Our work over the past 15 years, visiting and learning from leading companies around the world, including leading builders and buyers, consistently demonstrates that large, complex projects can be designed and built on schedule and within budget if the right practices are followed. These include things like, first, developing a solid business case, one that aligns technology, design knowledge, funding, industrial-based capacity, and time before committing to construction, then continuously evaluating that business case is maintained. Second, adopting iterative approaches that include developing and refining designs and cycles using knowledge gained from testing, validating, and obtaining user feedback. Third, improving collaboration by streamlining decision-making. And finally, strengthening in-house expertise and investing in modern ship design capabilities and digital tools to better execute and oversee programs. These approaches enable leading shipbuilders to develop complex ships in vastly shorter timeframes than the Navy and to be adaptable to evolving customer needs. And our work has shown that they can be thoughtfully applied to Navy shipbuilding. In conclusion, the Navy has much work to do to improve its practices and restore its credibility with Congress, taxpayers, and the fleet. It won't be easy, and breaking with entrenched ways of doing business requires sustained commitment over many years to see real change. Such improvements could help the Navy achieve its force structure goals faster, create stability for the industrial base, and send a clear message to potential adversaries that the U.S. Navy remains the dominant maritime force. Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Kane, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for your time and for allowing me to speak on this important topic. I'll take any questions you have.
I think the Ranking Member Kane and I are going to alternate going to do a vote, so we'll be in and out. So I'll start with my questions. Admiral Downey, how long have you had the job?
Just over a year, sir.
So you've
January
inherited
of
some of the issues you're dealing with.
A few issues, yes, sir.
All right, so let's talk about the Constellation-class frigate. So it's, 3 years behind budget, 3 years behind, way over budget. So let's talk about what went wrong. So first off, I think, here's my understanding, and tell me if I've got this wrong. The Navy chose a Constellation-class frigate based on the parent design of the European frigate used by Italy and France, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You're right, man. The Navy awarded the design to Fincantieri Marinette Marine for about $800 million for the lead ship, right?
Yes, sir, with a competition across 5 folks for about 18 months.
Yep. Construction began in August 2022 with the Navy certifying basic and functional design was complete as required by law. So,
Yes, sir.
a little over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, right? So how did a ship that started with 85% in common with the parent design fall to 15% in common with that parent design? And were those design changes from the Navy or from the shipyard?
Sir, I'll start with the design changes, a combination of both. There's a group of about 182 changes. About 80% of the changes were requested from Fincantieri to align their design to the build spec, adjust the build spec to their design. Significant changes to get closer to what they proposed. And then there was about 20% from Navy. Of those of Navy, we invoked Build America Act, which changed equipment in the propulsion plant, but that was the decision to start from the first of the class. We canceled a couple systems, the MQ-8, for example, and said we'll get to that in the future. We reduced speed on the ship. There was a very significant speed requirement in Sea State 6 beyond what a destroyer would be required. So there's a combination of changes on both sides, sir.
So why were the changes made?
The 20% on the Navy side were to change to the requirements that we had proposed and to cancel. So about 4 changes, 3 changes there, 1 cancellation of speed, and 2 other system cancellations because those programs got canceled out. The vast majority of the changes, working together with Fincantieri, were their recommendations to align the build spec, change what we put out to closer to their FREM proposal.
So was that a decision by the Navy or a decision by Congress?
The Navy changes were a decision by Navy working with Fincantieri. The other changes were proposed by Fincantieri, and Navy agreed to the changes.
Did that increase the cost?
It took, overall, yes, from a perspective of time, because design wasn't completed, right? So they fell behind in design, and therefore it's contributing to the 36 months.
So was it a fixed price contract?
Yes.
So
fixed price contract for, fixed price incentive fee contract for building the ship, and the shipbuilder went with a firm fixed price design contract.
Okay, and they won.
To a subcontractor.
Yeah, they won in a bid process, right?
I'm sorry, sir?
They won through a bid.
They went through a bid with us, and then they contracted to Gibbs and Cox for the design.
So are they making money?
No.
Okay.
They're losing money.
As a result of losing money, did they slow anything down?
Yes, as I said, I took this job, had the opportunity for this command in January of 24. Was invited to sit through a review a couple months before that, and could see that the reviews needed additional rigor. That the status of production was about 3%, but design was reported as holding up production despite the prior estimates of how far design was completed. So overall, what appeared to be occurring to me is the design was being significantly over-progressed.
So the company, the builder, made the decision to slow down because they were losing money.
Yes, because they chose to do a firm fixed price design contract.
Does that bother you?
Yes.
Huh. Okay.
To address this, we surged about 80 people up on site in Wisconsin with the monies invested to drive a collaborative approach to finished design. We expect that functional design will complete by this summer. We've gone from 30% first-time quality as I took that first review and came into the job to 80% by co-locating Navy engineers, not only with Fincantieri, but also requiring Fincantieri to bring their subcontractor up on site in Wisconsin as well.
Okay. All right, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Oakley, I know that the President's announced a new office to oversee shipbuilding, but on the other hand, the Musk operation, call it whatever you will, and the Secretary of Defense are evidently going to fire people who would be hands-on overseeing and supervising shipbuilding. Am I right that this kind of mass firing of the civilian workforce, many of them veterans, would undermine and potentially set back our shipbuilding efforts?
I don't have any insight into the specific cuts that DOJ is proposing for the Navy programs or the Navy workforce. I will say that our report that we issued a few weeks ago on the Navy's shipbuilding and ship repair industrial base identified workforce capacity as a key issue that came up over and over again, both within the Navy and at the builders, as a key challenge for turning things around in terms of performance, both at the yards and within the Navy itself.
So building the workforce requires investment in people. It requires morale and a commitment of support to people who show up for work every day, whether it's building submarines or other ships or supervising the process of committing resources to them, correct?
Yeah, I think it would be difficult to build up a workforce without that kind of support.
Let me ask others here, how do we build that workforce, which we've talked about doing for years and years in submarine construction, for example, and it isn't getting done, evidently?
Yeah, so one, appreciate the question. I think we're putting a lot of effort in our maritime industrial base arena. This body has funded us about $4 billion over the last 2 years, and we have aggressively got after kind of the workforce hiring and retention. I think we've seen some good effect on the hiring, arena. I think you've seen the buildsubmarines.com at some of our major sporting events. We'll probably be in the March Madness arena too on advertisements. We've had 16 million hits on that site, 2.5 million applications. It's led to about 9,700 employees hired in 23, a 40% increase over 22, another 10K in 24. But sir, those folks are coming, and then we're attriting out way too quick. We probably are seeing 50 to 60% attrition in our first-year employees, and it is about the labor rates. Used to, when I was working in manufacturing in the 80s, minimum wage was $3.35 an hour, and we paid 3 or 4x for $13 or $14 an hour for our labor. Today, it's about 1.2x compared to the living wage, and it's impacting that significantly.
Electric Boat is doing a lot of great work in its apprenticeship program and its outreach, in training, in going into the community colleges and the schools. But I'm hopeful that the Department of Defense can do more to support what they are doing, and especially as we go into the NDAA, investing in apprenticeship training. Would you agree that we need to do more of it?
Most definitely. I was up at Electric Boat, had a chance to see some of the programs that they have. I think not only is it great from a training perspective, it's the community involvement, and it allows people to feel good about their workplace and their environment and their culture. So, yeah, very supportive of that, sir.
You would agree that we will continue to need to build more submarines?
Absolutely.
And that includes not just Virginia class, but also the Columbia class.
Absolutely, yes.
Would it be a mistake, I think you know what I believe, to For example, eliminate the Columbia class.
It would be a significant mistake. We have maritime dominance in that submarine arena, and the Columbia class is the most important leg of our nuclear triad, a critical capability that we need to maintain dominance in.
And do we need to continue to build the Virginia class?
Absolutely. Yes.
These are rhetorical questions.
They are rhetorical. We are all in with you, sir, on that, and you have.
I would see no need to ask in a normal time.
I understand.
But I'm appreciative that you're on record, and I believe the Department of Navy is as well, and I hope the Secretary of the Navy, newly confirmed, will be as passionate as you and I are.
Based on my conversations with him, I'm sure he will be, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Interim Chairman, I guess, Ranking Member Chairman. How do we, even if we wanted to scale our shipbuilding capacity, even if we wanted to take it to the 10, 20, 30x that we need to even approach what China's building right now, I mean, how do we physically do it? We don't even have the physical shipyards available to build those right now. So from an industrial-based perspective, how do we acquire the physical footprint to start building enough vessels that we're going to need very quickly?
So my first reaction to that, there's a lot of discussion around shipyard capacity and capability. There's a study ongoing right now with the Navy and Cape that will be out shortly that talks about the capacity and how much more is needed. I think at this point, the workforce issues that we're talking about and the greening of the workforce is leading to lots of rework. For example, at most of our yards right now, the years of experience is 3 to 4 years. I think unlocking that latent capacity is a lot about driving modernization into the yards, getting through some of these wages issues to have our retention numbers up. All those things starts to play. We also are working on a lot of.
I mean, I agree the workforce is key, but I think a workforce will fundamentally and eventually respond to a free market incentive and is relatively elastic. But last time we had to build a Navy fast, Henry Kaiser bulldozed, 10 miles of San Francisco Bay and built a shipyard. And we just don't have that capability anymore. I mean, whether it's, oceanfront real estate isn't available anymore. So, I've heard a lot about the workforce, and I totally agree with you. We're very aligned. The workforce issue, I think, is critical. But I have not really heard anybody yet talk about the real estate issue, which is how do we get the physical space available to conduct the work when needed. So, yeah, of course.
I think one of the things that needs to be considered is looking beyond these big platforms, right? Looking to smaller, non-traditional capabilities that could provide that decisive capability for us, in that China fight. Thinking about things like robotic autonomous systems, leveraging those kinds of things. Smaller yards can build those types of ships. And so when you're thinking about building up our capacity for shipbuilding in the United States, we can look toward those types of platforms to be the augmenter to the fleet that we need, not just looking to build, double or triple the amount of, large surface combatants.
And I'd agree, but I think, it's always fun to talk about the tactical end of the spear because that's what's fun to look at. But the reality is the heavy lift, sea lift, logistical capability to move a lot of people and a lot of stuff halfway around the world quickly that's actually what's more deeply concerning to me. And not the pointy end of the spear, the warfighting end of the Navy, but the ability to lift 500,000 troops and everything they need and all the vehicles they need halfway around the world quickly. And to that end, my second question, and then I'll yield back there, is the incentives around shipbuilding and the contractors there, and that Senator Scott alluded to. The shipbuilding acquisition model is very dated. It's basically still the same model that we had 80 years ago. Traditionally and historically, a lot of large naval fleets used leased vessels. And instead of placing the risk on the government to buy the ships and the contractors, basically, there is some risk there, but really the risk on the Navy to buy them. Has there been any study on exploration of leasing of ships, placing the risk on private companies who would be willing potentially to take that risk to build us a fleet that it wouldn't probably be right for guided missile destroyers and cruisers and submarines, but it could work for, like submarine tenders, which we're woefully short on right now. I think we have 2. We need like 15. and logistical vessels. Has there been exploration of leasing commercial vessels and putting the maintenance burden, the upgrade burden on the contractors, vice on the Navy?
I'll take that one, sir. I don't think so. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I haven't seen studies on leasing. You know, I'll go back to your other point. Whoever we need them produced. We have about 80 commercial vessels under U.S. flag versus thousands under another country. So it really, I think it goes back to your other point here of how do we increase capacity. So on the Navy, on the pure Navy side, we do have some. In my view, having worked with Maine and California a lot, there is more capacity up in Bath, and there is more capacity out at NASCO in California. We need to look at our requirements, our variations in builds, and how we get a longer run, similar to the DDG 51 program. We're all working on Virginia, and there's multiple blocks of Virginias. So that definitely has an effect on the producibility and the learning there. So I think we have to do both and get to who would produce them for us. We've added Wisconsin, Fincantieri, Marinette. We've added Austell, and now we have Hanwha in Philadelphia. We've also looked in the past at reactivating reserve or decommissioned ships. Principally the frigate class, and that has led to, it's a dated combat system. We've reactivated some of those ships for foreign countries, but it would mainly be for coastal patrol. But to your point, we need to do both. We need to grow the shipyards here and look at other acquisition options.
Thank you.
Senator King.
Thank you. I've been waiting 13 years for the timer to break, so there'd be no limit. A couple of sort of technical observations before I get to broader questions. One is, as you know, the DDX is in the design stage, and the concern from the point of view of the shipyards, both in Bath and in Mississippi, is that there be a smooth transition between DDG 51 and DDX. What concerns us is a timing trough, because you can't turn on and turn off welders. And so I hope that as you plan out the transition process, that's top of mind, because it would be disastrous for the yards if they couldn't, if there was a lag in demand between the two ships. Doctor, you're with me on that one?
Yeah, I am. So we saw the lessons from DDG 51 to DDG 1000 back in the day, and how some of that worked out. We clearly are going to be intentional about the transition of DDG 51 to DDGX to keep the production line hot, to then feather in DDGX, and then only taper out DDG 51 once DDGX is up and running.
Glad to hear that. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, we'll do.
Second point on this developing DDX, Ingalls and General Dynamics are working together on the design, which is a new approach, but it's an important one, and I hope the Navy will continue to iterate with them, because having the build yards be involved in the design will make a big difference in terms of construction, learning curve, and all those kinds of things. So I hope that project, which is underway, will be maintained, and the Navy will be forthcoming in terms of communication with the two yards.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I think I see that as a great opportunity. We're working with them even before preliminary design phase, and it gets to some of the things that you've talked about, Ms. Oakley, that we need to be doing. So excited, and we'll be all about it.
Well, having served on this committee for a while, it strikes me that one of the problems we have is requirements creep. At some point, it has to be pencils down. And if you learn anything from the Ford, it's that doing research while you're building a ship is not the way to go. So I think, again, that's as we move toward DDX, we need to say, okay, here's the requirements, here's the design, and let's build it, not let's iterate the design as we're moving through the construction process. That's what's really messed us up in some of these major overrun projects. If I were going to list the three biggest problems right now in developing shipyard capacity, the first would be workforce, the second would be workforce, and the third would be workforce. And the Navy has to be thinking in unconventional ways. For example, one of the most important things that can be done to develop workforce is to have childcare facilities, parking, the kinds of things that housing in the area. We've had people recruited to Bath who get there and then they can't find a place to live. And so I believe that has to be part of the mentality of developing workforce. And then, of course, training and all the details that go to attracting people in this economy. And finally, on the development of the infrastructure, it is the infrastructure itself. There has to be investment. It has to be a joint investment between the private shipyards and the Navy in terms of infrastructure, buildings, more efficient layout of the facility, and those kinds of steps I think are very, very important. So again, I'm giving you advice, but this is based on my experience with working with these shipyards. And I guess I would reiterate, I wanted to my final question is to GAO. You mentioned 60 or so recommendations that haven't been followed. What are the top three that if you were pressed, what are the top three recommendations that haven't been followed that you think would make a difference?
You're really pressing my memory on 60 recommendations, but I think most pressing in the front of my mind are our recommendations related to design and the changes that we'd like to see the Navy make with regard to, like you said, ensuring that the design is finalized before we're awarding a contract for construction and before we're starting to bend metal. Because the problems arise when those design changes start creeping in as the pressures of a fixed price contract begin to mount. And then that leads to just challenges overall, and it's just exactly what we're seeing with the frigate program. And so we made recommendations to the Navy that they ensure that they have matured their basic and functional design before awarding the contract for detailed design and construction. Another recommendation that we made was related to ensuring that detailed design on each individual block is finished before you begin construction on that block. Most of those recommendations are really aimed at ensuring that there's less of a likelihood that these surprises will pop up at a time where the pressure is going to be high to continue to proceed because of schedule or money challenges.
Well, I think this goes without saying, and I appreciate those. Modularity is king at this point. So we're building 40-year assets here. They ought to be constructed in such a way that they can be upgraded easily without ripping the whole platform apart. So I hope those are some things. The other thing that is something that I've observed is when we're buying these major objects, we should also buy the IP so that every ship can have its own 3D printer. And we don't have ships in port for an inordinate amounts of time waiting for a part. So I hope that's in your planning as well, because in this day and age, and by the way, I think the same thing about the Air Force. Availability is a big issue in our fleet, and we should improve our availability. We should benchmark against Carnival Cruise Lines, because if they were only available 40 or 50% of the time, they'd be out of business. So to the extent we can have intellectual property as part of the purchase, then you have the right to make the parts as necessary without even having necessarily to go back into port. Thank you.
Thank you for that, sir. I'll hit on a few of those points. Modularity. For the Ford class, we studied in the design that about 40% of the cost of modernization goes to rip out. So for the Ford class, where we have the command spaces, the O3 level, the gallery deck, we went with a general arrangement where all 19 mission bays are lined up against each other, and the services are moved out of the spaces, HVAC, ducting, these things, and built in a flexible infrastructure so that a common bolt size quick disconnect power panels, lighting, a pressurized underdeck, so that you don't have any ducting in the spaces. So those type of efforts of modularity that removes the, I'll say, hardware constrained interface or many different such interfaces to the systems is an area we significantly need to move forward with. On the tool sets, we also have some, I will say, not even balanced efforts, but some solid tool sets in the submarine area and digital arrangement drawings in the carrier area, so that it's not left to an interpretation of the worker. The drawings can be extremely complex. So we have invested in those areas significantly. Studies show in those areas that such tools, and I have one more point, but such tools can reduce labor by as much as 8% as you go through that work. The other key area on the commercial side, so been to Korea, Japan, India, Canada, et cetera, Spain, Italy, and the Middle East. Most of the yards that I've been to that have large production capability use a common tool set across the yard. We go by program. So when we get into yards that have multiple product lines, they may be using different tool sets, which causes, until you go into some of the other foreign large yards, it's less obvious in our yards of what's going on. And they don't change the tool set to the next one, new one, until it's ready to support all their product lines. Last point is, in our yards where we have multiple lines, they're also managed by program. They're not managed by a governance approach across the yard from the government side. So we have, some of our yards, we have more than half a dozen lines in those yards. So it goes to the priority of the program and the different government offices integrating. So we have been working closely on what is a governance approach that allows Shipyard X to get their programs done to cost and schedule in more than a program-focused manner.
I appreciate that, and you mentioned bolts, and I once visited a Toyota plant in Tokyo where they built one RAV4 a minute. One brand new automobile a minute came off the line. And they said one of the secrets of the success of that factory was listening to the workers. And one of the things I said, well, what kind of suggestions do they make? And he said, well, somebody noticed we had 86 different bolts in a Toyota, and we figured out how to make that into about 8. It saved a huge amount of time, a huge amount of acquisition, and that kind of analysis. I think the lesson there is to listen to the workers, because they know on the ship deck what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, just to comment on that, automotive guy in my past. And
is your mic on?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I'll get closer. Yeah. But yeah, automotive guy in my past. Quick story about Toyota and GM. When I was working for General Motors, worst running plant in our lineup was the Fremont plant. Had about 55% uptime on the assembly line, 20% absenteeism, criminal activity. GM gave up and just shut the plant down in 80 or 81. 3 years later, Toyota wanted a footprint in the U.S. to make vehicles. We wanted to learn TPS, Toyota Production System. They said, let's use the Fremont plant. We said, no, don't. You don't want to do that, right? Bad karma. They convinced us, and then they said, let's hire the people back. And we said, no, you really don't understand. You don't want to do that. But they did it. And in 3 years, it was the best running plant in our lineup, 96% uptime, just an incredible work environment. And you'd go there and you would see folks on fire for what they were doing at their station. And it was because they were empowered to make changes for what they were doing to improve their work and their efficiency and throughput. It was an amazing thing to see the difference. And you're absolutely right that it pays dividends in any manufacturing arena where there's a lot of touch labor and folks can improve what they're doing. Over.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Madam, for your testimony.
I'll just make a quick comment because your last comment about talking to the people is and many of your comments are completely in line with our leading practices for product development, that GAO has gone and talked to leading companies all across the world and asked them, how do they do business? How do they meet customer needs? How do they get products out on time, quickly, and on budget? And one of the key aspects of that is that user feedback, the people who are actually going to be using the product, give feedback all along the way, from the beginning to the end, that drives changes in that design drives changes in how it's produced, and then results in providing the customer with a capability that they actually want and will be happy with. And so I think what you're saying is completely in line with recommendations we've made both to DoD and to the Navy to bring their practices more in line with how these leading companies do business.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to hopscotch around to some topics. Ms. Oakley, on the last point, I would suggest sometime GAO go visit a company in Lynchburg, Virginia, Framatome, which is one of the main suppliers in the nuclear base. And Framatome is responsible for going out during outages at nuclear power plants. Outages are not disasters. They're the planned period where they pull a reactor out, retrofit it and put it in, and obviously they want to do that as fast as they can. And watching how they are able to do this work of such complexity, surge it and do it in a very short time so that the reactor is not offline and is actually producing power, it makes me a little bit embarrassed as I think about how slow we are in some other aspects of what we do. So that would be one to, put on your visit list. To Admiral Downey or Dr. Seidle, do you all know how the shipbuilding enterprise workforce has been affected thus far by DOGE or particular directives from the Secretary that might be related to DOGE?
So I'll make some comments, and I'll let Admiral Downey make a few comments as well on that.
And I'll accept no, I don't know yet for an answer if you don't really have the sense of it. But
so the earlier comments, I think the first thing that has, that we have been assessing is the deferred resignation program. In the area that kind of I oversee, if you think about the PEO community and the supervisor shipbuilders that he has, it looks like those numbers are in the 3% range. And whenever we look at the number of folks on that list that were probably retirement eligible and decided to say, I'm going to take this now, as a result, it drops down to about 1.5%. So it is a manageable thing for us when you think about normal attrition.
How about on the probationary side?
Probationary side, small numbers as well. And as you know, we've kind of stopped that process. And so But yeah, once again, the numbers in my neck of the woods appear to be manageable to work through because we have that kind of attrition also on a yearly basis.
Admiral Downey, anything different to offer on that?
I would offer, I represent a large part of the Navy enterprise, about 90,000 folks, and they're 90% civilian. The deferred retirement number across that enterprise for me is around 1,200 folks. And with the offers, these are people who chose to retire. There were very few probationary people that were probationary due to performance.
Right.
However,
the probationaries, for everybody who isn't familiar with this, they're new hires. So they're either brand new or they're career switchers. So somebody going from active duty to civilian, DOD, that's a career switcher who then is probationary.
Yes, sir. That's where I was going. My folks hired 7,400 people last year, about 8% of the 90,000, and that's not uncommon per year. As we've worked through the definitions, almost all of those folks have been, I'll get the word wrong, accepted or exempted because of the national defense work that they're doing. The other area was purchase cards.
Right.
We purchase a lot in our naval shipyards. One shipyard that's how they buy material. So Portsmouth Naval Shipyard may have more than 1,000 transactions a month, et cetera. I have in the 10 to 15,000 a month across all these areas, and we were able to turn on per command what I asked for to have turned back on.
So everybody wasn't limited to just $1.
So far we're very brief interruption, and we've gotten back to what I've asked to have back. On the industry side, across this rest of this decade, the shipbuilding need for what we have booked is to hire about 200,000 people. That's what's needed across that effort. So the stabilization of programs, the not changing of requirements, that's going to be critically important to attract these people. Last one on that, on wages, Dr. Seidle hit where those wages are. Some of our initiatives to focus on a 25% increase for the first folks, you know, the first year people, $20 to $25, that adds about 1% to the cost of a ship. A $4 billion ship becomes a $4 billion and 40.
Now, when you mentioned this to me yesterday, I'm curious about this. So, Dr. Seidle, you were testifying right as I came back from voting about this, the odd compression between, you know, it used to be that a shipbuilder compared to minimum wage was making, you know, multiple X minimum wage. And now we're down to 1.3, 1.4, which makes the relative attractiveness of a job in the shipyard less. The point that Admiral Downey made yesterday and today is if you increase sort of beginning salaries, and I guess you do some other adjustments so there's not unacceptable salary compression, but if you do a 25% increase, it changes the cost of a carrier, for example, by 1%, because so much more is not in the salary side, and that's an important thing, and I think that's something that we have to grapple with. Here's a question I was curious about.
And one point on that,
Yep.
sir, if I may. It's not simply to raise the wage, but if we can retain these folks and have them focused, we're going to deliver closer to schedule, and the overall cost is going to come down.
Yeah, we're dealing with this greening of the workforce, and retention is really important. Let me ask you this. I was pleased when the President, during his State of the Union on March 4, announced plans to establish a White House Office of Shipbuilding to revitalize U.S. shipbuilding industry. I'm just wondering, have you been read in, or are there yet details about what that looks like? What's the Navy's plan for collaborating with this White House Office of Shipbuilding? How might it be structured? Who might the leadership be? This is 21 days after that speech, so maybe the answer is no, but do you know any more about that proposal?
Yeah, at this point, it is still early in the discussions on that. We do expect to have solid integration, have been told that we'll be over there regularly having conversations, but to date, we still haven't moved out on our end yet on some of that.
We'll want to keep track on that from the subcommittee standpoint. Over to you, Ms. Oakley, on something. The GAO had a report that was a December report about amphibious warfare fleet. Navy needs to complete key efforts to better ensure ships are available for Marines. And the report had this conclusion: the Navy is likely to face difficulties meeting a statutory requirement to have at least 31 amphibious ships in the future, given the age of the ships and other factors. There's a provision in the NDA at Section 1023 that requires that the naval combat force of the Navy shall include not less than 31 operational amphibious warfare ships. But it allows to be counted as operational ships that are temporarily unavailable. What's the GAO's perspective on how the Navy is interpreting temporarily unavailable? Because we want 31, but we don't want 31 discounted by a deep fraction of temporarily unavailable ships that we really can't count on to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that report pointed out that some of the things that were considered temporarily unavailable were years at a time unavailable and counted toward that total.
Would you suggest that in an NDAA, for example, this year, we should take some of that ambiguity out of a phrase like temporarily unavailable and maybe be a little more specific about what we mean?
I think the more specific you can be and given direction to the Navy would be helpful, because then it leaves it up to their interpretation. The other thing I'd mention is that we have recommendations from 2020 that ask the Navy to reconsider how it defines operational availability, because oftentimes those definitions can be based upon a ship just being able to get underway, but not actually being able to do its missions. And those recommendations remain unopened, and there's no action yet on those recommendations.
I have one other question I'd like to ask maybe before. I'm sure you have a second round, and I may think of some other things too. But to Ms. Oakley, in your opening testimony, you were kind of assessing some of the challenges that, you know, undergirded the report that you recently did about pacing challenges in construction. And one of the things you said, maybe in response to a question, is some degree of sort of unreality between the ships we're putting under contract, and the Navy sort of does it with an optimism about the future budget meeting what they've put under contract, and we're not really lining up, you know, what we're saying we're going to do with the budgetary resources. And I'm troubled by this. I mean, here's a recent example that speaks to a potential cognitive dissonance. We did a reconciliation bill a couple weeks back that suggested we should spend about another $150 billion in defense. We're going to continue to, on top of what the base budget has been, we're going to continue to work on that. But at the same time as we were doing that, the Secretary was sending out kind of the cut memo to the Pentagon, exempting 17 areas, but saying, and everybody else, come up with a 5 to 8% cut. Now, I get it that just asking for a cut plan does not mean you're going to accept the full plan. And just because you've exempted somebody in round one doesn't mean you won't come back to them later. But it did seem to me a little odd that we were saying we need $150 billion more, and at the same time I'm reading the memo from the Secretary of Defense saying everybody's got to give me cuts. Maybe the cuts are going to be reprogrammed back in, but I just worry that we are not really being like cold-blooded and objective and just truthful. I mean, sometimes the eyes are bigger than the stomach, and we want more than we're willing to pay for. But what is the way we get at that problem? I mean, it's got to be discipline on our shoulders, but it also has to be discipline over at the Pentagon.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to get at that. You know, when we're talking about realism, we don't just mean that they can't do what they put on paper under their current budget. We mean that they can't do what they put on paper at all, right? So they walk into these programs oftentimes with these unrealistic business cases that say, oh, the technology will mature, the design will work out, that system will get there on time. And then we structure all of the cost and schedule estimates around that optimism, and then they don't arrive. And then that causes cascading delays and problems, right? And so then the overall top line that's required increases. Instead of putting in the work at the beginning to gain the knowledge that you need to be able to understand, here's what it's going to take to get there, both from a cost and schedule perspective, and then putting forth those realistic budget estimates, those realistic schedule estimates that match with that. Now, that doesn't mean that you automatically say, oh, you know what, it's going to take us 20 years to build this ship, and that's just what it is, right? That's where our leading practices for product development could really be useful to the Navy, because these leading companies, they don't focus on going for a home run every time. They build their products such that they can be designed and iterated on over the course of a number of years. They put in that work at the beginning to understand what is the most important thing that we need to provide a valuable capability to our customer, or to the sailor in this case, and how do we then structure a program that can be done quickly to get that out, all while we're thinking about what is the next iteration, what's the next thing that we can get them quickly. And then that then therefore truncates the amount of money that you need and the amount of time that you need to look toward devoting that money, and could allow the Navy to be flexible and agile to changing threats.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll just ask a question before Senator Sullivan gets ready. Dr. Sauer, you worked in the auto industry. Were you in a supplier, or were you one of the big companies?
So first worked with General Motors for about 13 years. Then I was with Alcoa when we stood up a plant to support the big three automakers.
Did you ever get a fixed price contract with one of the OEMs? Did you ever agree to build something for a fixed price?
I certainly did.
Yeah. And when you did that, did you take in consideration you might have to pay somebody to do the work?
Sure did.
Did you take in consideration what you would have to pay them in wages?
Yes.
Yeah, probably did, right? And so, did you say, well, that's after you got the contract? Did you go back to the OEM and say, I really don't like this contract. I'd like to get paid more?
I'll tell you, sir, we had several contracts that were underwater when I was with Alcoa, really trying to buy our way into that business. the first time, and so we dealt with those, to your point, right?
And the
We
OEMs
owned it,
They were
right?
so understanding, right?
Right.
They just said, sure, we'll just
You
give you a
know,
little bit more money.
yeah, no.
'Cause it was a bid contract, and you made the decision to go into that and get the contract, and then you lost money.
There wasn't enough understanding,
So
sir.
did you, when you were doing that, did you say, what I heard that Admiral Downey say, that the builder just decided, "Oh, just stop working"?
Yeah.
Did you
no.
ever do that?
No, I did not do
Yeah,
that, sir.
would that have ever helped you get more contracts with
That-
OEMs?
That would not, sir.
All right. So did one of the OEMs ever say to you, I'm really worried about your workforce?
Yeah.
Yeah. But did they say, let me give you a whole bunch more money?
No, they didn't, sir.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, what's frustrating to me is that these people go bid on these contracts. So like Senator Kane said, well, you brought it up earlier that there's been wage compression. And I think in a lot of industries, there's been a lot of wage compression. But no one told these companies to set the wage at this wage.
Yeah.
They made that decision.
Yeah, this gets to the business case issues that Ms. Oakley brings up, right? The business case has to stand on its own for them and for us both,
Now,
right?
it's our job to review to make sure.
Amen.
Like when I ran an auto company. We were a supplier to the big companies. Okay? So my contracts, I had to reduce my prices. I had to find productivity gains every year, year after year after year. I lost a contract by contract.
Yeah.
They never came to me, shocking, and said, let me just give you a little bit more money. I feel sorry for you.
Yeah,
It just makes you mad that these people go out there, and what you've said is they're bitching because they can't get a workforce. Whose responsibility is it? They bid for the darn contract.
Yeah, in my opinion, right, the business cases right now are not where they need to be for both our industrial partners and ourselves. And so then we have some of these contracts that are pre-COVID contracts as well, and ultimately we find ourselves in a tough situation. Now, sir, I will also tell you, I am a proponent of working closely with them right now to get to the right answer, to make these adjustments, to do the right thing, because our nation needs it. And I also, as I've been out there meeting with them, I see industrial partners that are willing to come to the party as well with us. I can't speak to what's happened the last 2 or 3 decades on that front, but I can tell you what I'm seeing now, right?
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great questions. It's good to have a businessman as a senator. Okay, boy, oh boy. I don't even know where to begin on this topic, but I think the really good news is the President of the United States and everybody on this committee, bipartisan group of senators, we all want to get at this problem, fix this problem. Boy, I don't even know where to begin. Let me begin, Ms. Oakley. Great job on your guys' newest study that came out, your report. I sent it to the incoming Secretary of the Navy and said, you should read this. Very quickly, from your big analysis, the top 3 things, maybe if you've already said it, say it again, that you think we should be doing. And again, the big idea here is that everybody wants to fix this. The President, the SecNav, all of us. So that's not always the case in Congress. And we're willing to put a lot of money towards it. But that's not always needed either. What are the big 3 that you would recommend succinctly here?
I think you're referring to the industrial base report that
Correct.
we issued. Yeah, so from that report, I think the biggest thing is that the Navy needs to ensure that it seizes this bipartisan support and opportunity that it has with all the investments that are going into address the industrial base challenges and issues. So that report, as you note, determined that the Navy didn't really have metrics in place to
Or a strategy for
or
that
a strategy to guide those investments.
Last Navy Secretary, God love him, but when you're getting the climate action report to Congress, which is not required by Congress, you're talking about climate change all the time and not shipbuilding. No wonder we're in this disaster. But I'm going to look towards the future.
Well, that takes me to my next point in looking toward the future. So the Navy kind of has two problems here, right? As Admiral Downey mentioned, there's already 90 ships under contract. I think that amounts to about $150 billion backlog of ships. So the ship in some cases has already sailed on those products. And so what they can do in that regard is look toward gaining that knowledge about design, ensuring designs are stable before construction begins so that that construction progress isn't disrupted and we're not talking about design changes.
Okay, I want to touch on that point. Did you guys see the Wall Street Journal piece? They did a really good piece recently on, I'm trying to think of what ship it was.
Frigate.
It was on frigates.
Yeah, and all the change orders that just killed it. I had the honor of having lunch just a week ago with the former Secretary of the Navy, John Lehman, who was responsible for building Reagan's 600-ship Navy. Pretty impressive, right? The size of the U.S. economy was about 1/3 that size than we are today. The employment, and these guys just focused and built a gigantic Navy that helped us win the Cold War. He did it. He was Secretary for 6 years. And I said, Mr. Secretary, how'd you do it, and what's the number one thing? He said, change orders. I stopped him. I said, once we get to a phase, done. And he told me all the examples of industry and everybody, some big top guy in industry tried to get him fired, and he says, we're done. No change. Build that ship. Build 30, 40 of them. Maybe come back after that. Build the ship. Stop with the change orders. I think the Navy right now is almost the opposite. That Wall Street Journal article was, heck, every time some captain in the Navy had a new idea, it was a brand new change order, it seemed like, on that ship. So would you agree that that's like a huge one? Certainly Secretary Lehman thought it was huge, and that guy knew what the heck he was doing, right? He built the 600-ship Navy under Reagan.
I think that when you're talking about being able to snap a chalk line like that and say no more change, you have to make sure that you've done the work to understand that you can even actually build the ship that you've designed. And so our recommendations would focus on doing that upfront work so that you can snap that chalk line and be assured of the ship that you're building and the time frames and costs with which you're going to be able to build it.
Okay, it's a great point, because it's not like we've never done this before, right? It's not like we don't know how to build Navy ships. It's not like how we don't know how to build a giant fleet. We just need to relearn our lessons from the past. Would you agree with that?
I agree. The Navy knows what it's doing.
So, Admiral, let me ask you, it's a really big question, and you're the perfect guy to answer it. So, you know, we have this great, impeccable culture of excellence and safety record in our nuclear reactor program. And the head of Navy nuclear reactors is an admiral, starting with the legendary Hyman Rickover, who has a 8-year billet. You think that's part of the reason Navy nuclear reactors has been so successful?
Certainly is part of it. Continuity is important in these complex projects.
So, I had a provision last year in the NDAA that said your job, Nav Sea, which oversees all the shipbuilding from design to building, should have an 8-year billet. A little radical, but I took the example from the Navy nuclear reactors. How long is your billet right now?
3 years.
Okay, 3 years.
And typically, it's a year or two extension. You start with 3-year orders and...
Oh, do they normally extend you?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
well, then that makes my amendment even smarter. Because I think you're an admiral, you're a vice admiral, by the way. Is it always a vice admiral?
This job?
Nav Sea?
It's been a vice admiral since the 70s.
Okay. So I think you're a great vice admiral, but when you're 2-3 years in, year 3, and this is nothing against you or all the other vice admirals, this is a really big job. You're probably like, I wonder if I can make admiral. And so you're looking around and you're kind of maybe not so focused. I'm not saying you, I'm just saying generically. So the Senate, in a debate, right in this room, good debate. Everybody, I got Democrats, Republicans pushed back on me, and by the end, they were like, geez, Dan, this makes a lot of sense. Let's do 8 years, NAVC, like the Navy nuclear reactor's head. In the last 3 years, he's a full admiral, 4-star, and that way, and it's your last job, just like Navy nuclear reactors. Now, we were told the Pentagon and the Navy hated my idea. When it went to conference, they stripped it out. So there you go. An innovation that I think was pretty darn good. You're even telling me that normally it's 3 years, but they say, oh, you might be extended 1 or 2 if we need you. No, let's just say, like Navy nukes, that NAVC should start as a 3-star, get promoted to a 4-star, 8 years. So you are responsible for designing and building ships. 3 years, I mean, how long does it take to build a Arleigh Burke guided missile destroyer? Typically.
About 5 years.
Yeah, so you can't even oversee the building of one ship. Is that correct?
Not from start to finish.
No, you can't. How about a frigate? How long normally?
Well, frigates from the past. We're still working on that schedule now.
I know you are.
But this started in '22, and we're forecasting a 3-year delay, so 7 years.
Okay.
But it should be back to the 4-ish year point of view.
But even that's 4 years, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now I know you probably got to get permission from Big Navy to answer this question, but what do you think about the idea of having the NAVC, like the head of Navy nuclear reactors, be an 8-year billet, oversee it, own it, and then you retire as a 4-star admiral when you're done, just the way Admiral Rickover did, just the way pretty much everyone else did, with the exception, I think, of Admiral Richardson, who did such a good job. He was promoted to CNO, but that was unusual. What do you think of that idea? Especially, how many years are you into your current billet?
Just over a year.
Okay.
January of '24.
So do you think you'd be able to do a better job if you were looking at your current billet and saying, I have 7 more years to turn this machine around? Or right now you're like, geez, I got 2 more years left. I wonder if I'm going to make 4-star admiral. I wonder if I should be looking around. What do you think is better for you?
So a couple technical nuances. There is no 4-star. I'm an engineering duty officer. So our last 4-star was Admiral Rickover.
We can make the NAVC. We can make the NAVC admiral in his final 3 years of an 8-year billet a 4-star admiral. That's our.
I understand. My
authority.
Point is, I'm not out looking for another one.
No, look.
Not that I wouldn't love to stay.
I'm using you as a generic example. None of this is directed at you. You're doing a great job.
What I would offer is my most complex jobs I've had have been more than 3 years.
Okay.
Not by initial design, but had a certain destroyer program and wasn't leaving even after selected for flag until that ship was delivered.
And isn't that make my point, kind of? And if NAVC typically gets extended beyond 3 years, which sounds like it does, isn't that make the point of what we're trying to do here? Because this committee and the U.S. Senate agreed with the amendment. We passed that amendment, got stripped out in the House conference.
Continuity is usually a good thing.
Okay.
And then you can do whatever you need to do to the person if they're not performing. Another nuance, it's a little complicated, just my personal comment. As you promote halfway through, who relieves you? Does a 3-star relieve a 4? Yeah. So it's a little, that long run's got to be thought of.
Don't we do that with Navy nuclear reactors?
No, 4-star relieves a 4-star.
Okay. All right, well, we'll figure that out. Anyone else have a view on that from our experts here? I'm way over my time, sorry.
I'll answer it with a question. Any large corporation that has complex products, do they change out their leadership that quickly? There you go.
That's consistent with my knowledge.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm going to make another attack at this idea, and hopefully the Navy will agree with us, not fight to kill it, which they did successfully last year.
Thank you. Admiral Downey, could a shipbuilder, let's go back to what Senator King was talking about. Could a shipbuilder act on recommendations from its workers, such as standardizing the bolts or making other changes, as Senator King suggested, or would it take years to get the change qualified and approved by the Navy?
Thank you for the question, sir. It depends upon what the change is. What the senator was referring to are Gemba walks. You're at the water, I'm sure you're familiar. So we have been, on the surface maintenance side, in the last 20 months, we've doubled the on-time delivery. And we have been doing Gemba walks for about the last 3 years of what is holding things up, how do we go faster. Getting it into the larger complex system, it takes longer than that, and we've seen that. So we've been really focused on additive manufacturing efforts. We've got about 15 different major projects going on and moving those parts, as an example, from 900 to 9,000 available. We need to move much quicker here. We are not moving quick enough.
Why does it take so, you know what I don't understand? I was never in the shipbuilding business, but why is it, I don't get why it would take that long to build a ship. I mean, you know, you have all the parts, and so why would it take, I mean, you can see maybe it'd take 2 years to build a ship, but 4 years, 5 years, 8 years? I mean, if you just start thinking about it, if the way we do manufacturing in this country, it didn't seem like it would take that long.
Right. So that's an area we need to improve. We don't have all the material up front. We buy it throughout. So the committee, Congress has supported us significantly in the last few years of changing advanced procurement from 2 years to 3 years. Half of our material in the last 3 to 4 years, 5 years, is taken half as long again so we don't start with all that material there, even if it's a follow-on multi-year. We need to affect that and make sure we're ready. We need better efforts in kitting the jobs for the workers, that the hours that are effective as we analyze them, it's not where it needs to be. They're back and forth to the work site.
But that's the responsibility of the company that bid on this contract.
Yeah, I'm not arguing, sir.
That's what's frustrating about this is that's their job. Nobody asked you that when you were in the auto business, did they? No.
I agree with you.
How long does it take to build a cruise ship?
It's closer to the couple of years.
Do you know?
Yeah, we benchmarked. The longest commercial ship that we benchmarked took 52 months. The quickest Navy ship that we benchmarked was somewhere around 90.
So a
complex commercial cruise ship
took 50
at most.
At most. And what was the like the second one of this, you know, when like Royal Caribbean has all these ocean or whatever, well, how much did the second one, after they built that first one at that design?
I don't have that data, but it's never longer.
Golly, it just doesn't make sense. So, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me why we're doing this. So, Dr. Seidle, so why did the Navy use a firm fixed price contract for the design and construction of the frigate? What was the rationale, and do you think that was right?
I can't speak to the rationale of that, and honestly, Admiral Downey might have better sight picture on that. We certainly talk a lot about firm fixed price for lead ships is not what we typically want to do, right? That's not how we are typically trying to roll. So not sure about the decision back at that time. I can pull the thread on that, or if Admiral Downey has additional insight, but it's not typical what we would do for a lead ship.
Go ahead.
The Navy awarded a fixed price incentive fee with the shipbuilder, and for a first of class, and then the shipbuilder awarded a firm fixed price with their subcontractor. I don't know why we didn't say, why are you doing that? How is that risk balanced? But we also awarded a fixed price incentive fee for TAGOs, for example. Mm-hmm. So there's some, you can trace this back several years ago, that there was more than one, there was more than two, there was 3 or 4 programs that we're starting first of class with, and we're doing fixed price. And having been involved with this business a long time, Generally, that's not a risk-balanced approach for a first of class.
Ms. Oakley, so when you give them these ideas, and then they don't do them, do they tell you you're crazy? Do they just ignore you? What do they do?
Thankfully, I've never had anybody in the Navy tell me I'm crazy.
They just ignore you.
Yeah, it's just a lack of action in a lot of different respects. I think also, too, the recommendations don't get elevated to the level that they need to be able to be resolved. And I'm glad to be able to work with Dr. Seidle, going forward on how we can get some of these recommendations implemented.
Okay.
I'll make a comment on that. We met last week to talk about this as well and spent some time together. I think in the past, we typically are talking to each other via reports, which is not really the way to get after it, right? And I think we can do a lot better job of working closely with her office, and I mean that sincerely.
Yeah. Going back to what Senator Sullivan said, the problem you have if you sit here, who's responsible? Nobody, because we change people out all the time. So far, so it could, can you say John was responsible or Sally was responsible for the frigate not being done on time?
Not,
yeah. In business, you could.
Yes, sir. No. Multiple folks involved and multiple turnovers over that period of time.
And has anybody been held accountable?
Not from a termination perspective.
From a didn't get promoted?
Yes. I will share. I've terminated for cause, relief for cause, multiple folks. I terminated the Ford program manager when I was the PEO. I terminated the shipyard CO and XO out in the Far East this fall. And those aren't decisions that you ponder. Yeah. It's not fun, but those are decisions that have to be reported to Congress, and you got to move out on it. Overall, where that is appropriate, it has in the longer run, a positive effect on the workforce and the product line.
Yeah, in business, no one wants to fire anybody, right? It's not your fun day, right? You get boy today, I'm excited, but if you don't, then nothing happens. So, right. Yeah, I'm done.
And Senator Shaheen is on her way, so as soon as she comes in, I'll depart. How tariffs on aluminum and steel? How might that affect the cost of these inputs into a supply chain where we're already seeing costs go up faster than the rate of inflation?
So we're having those discussions. It's a little early from an assessment perspective. Probably about half of our aluminum and a third of our steel in 23 came from Canada. Clearly, tariffs in those arenas could drive cost. But having said that, the steel plate and bar for our shipbuilding efforts, most of it is domestically sourced. But we are expecting impacts, but we don't have our hands around yet what those impacts are yet.
Would it be hard or easy to go from 66% domestic to 100% domestic like that?
Yeah, don't have the.
It'd be hard. It'd be hard. Let me. Last thing I'll say, and Senator Shaheen's about to arrive, and I know I'll have a couple of questions. Just on the matching our reality to our budget. I'm very pro-AUKUS. I think it's great. I think we need to have more alliances in the Indo-Pacific. We need to deal with the China threat that the chair discussed. But I am worried about this reality to budget, and in particular, given that the Australian Parliament did something that I just shudder to contemplate, what it would be like if we tried to do this here. They had a debate, and they voted to give the U.S. $3 billion for the U.S. workforce to help build subs for Australia. So imagine we were having a debate on the floor of the Senate about we want to give the UK $3 billion to help us do something. It would be a very tough debate. They did it, and they made the commitment, and it demonstrates the concern that they have about China, obviously. But we have a lot at stake in trying, once they have gone out on that political limb, way out on the limb, we've got a lot at stake in trying to make sure we can meet the commitment. And so we need to meet our own needs for sure, but that's a huge commitment that they've made to us, and we need to reciprocate. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Senator Shaheen, are you ready?
I will be short. So I think this is for Dr. Seidle. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You most certainly are, ma'am.
All right.
Thanks.
As you know, at our nation's 4 public shipyards, and actually Senator Kane may have raised this concern, the maintenance and sustainment mission is critical. With that in mind, I wanted to ask about the future of the SIOP program, which is very important to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. And I hear that the Navy's getting close to a decision on the infrastructure upgrades that are required for the Ford-class carrier program at the Puget Sound Shipyard, and that this will be the largest construction project that the Navy's ever undertaken. And while I understand that the Navy has said it will not impact other SIOP projects that are already underway, I want you to reassure me that that is in fact the case, because there are a number of projects underway at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard that will be affected if there are impacts on other yards that are already have SIOP projects under construction.
Yeah, thank you for that question, ma'am. The multi-mission dry dock, obviously, and the infrastructure upgrades, an important effort that we are absolutely looking at and intend to move forward with. I think it's fair to say not impacts to current SIOP projects that are ongoing right now. We have about $6.3 billion worth of projects across 51 different 51 different projects, and it includes dry docks up at Portsmouth, 2 of those there. We got a dry dock at Norfolk. We got a dry dock going in at Pearl as well, and so those efforts are all ongoing. The M2D2 is about 80% complete from a design perspective. Like I said, don't expect impacts to current SIOP projects, but we will obviously prioritize funding and SIOP issues going forward, and some of that will play out in our decision making, and we'll continue to update via kind of our SIOP 5-year plan. I'm bullish on SIOP is doing great things for the Navy. Mark Edelson and his team really doing good work, not only solving some of these infrastructure issues that we've had forever. Somebody was telling, our most recent built shipyard is in 1908. We don't often think about it that way, but there's just great
New
efforts.
Hampshire's goes back to 1800, so.
I know, right. So just great work ongoing there. Also a lot of industrial equipment, $500 million and probably 237 pieces of equipment, I think, is the number. So we are committed to staying the course on SIOP in perpetuity. So we'll continue to keep you updated and apprised as we move forward.
So as you're thinking about the commitment in Puget, what's the timetable? And so what should people who are watching this be considering as they're thinking about where the decision points are for what's going to happen?
Yeah, ma'am, I'll take that question for the record and get back with you from a timing, because I don't want to misspeak on that, because I know it's an important piece of the equation. But we'll take that for the record and come back to you.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Ma'am, I can offer.
Please.
Being responsible for the shipyards. Just had an update this morning on how it's going in Portsmouth on the dual docking capability, and overall going well. That project is well ahead of M2D2, but your senses are right. It's a large project, M2D2. Ford-class carrier docking capability and major electrical upgrades. As we go through these SIOP decisions, reviews and decisions, there's 2 constant themes of the reviews. How is it going to affect the work of the ships that are being processed through the yards? And then how is it going to affect the other projects? So these are themes at the highest levels of the Navy as we go through. And we'll get the specific dates, but roughly M2D2 is I'll use the phrase a slow start around the 28 timeframe, and 2030 kind of the large start. That's the rough timeframe, and we'll come back and validate. A lot of that, of course, depends upon where we are in the budget process and what the national priorities are.
And so will the fact that we're in a continuing resolution for the remainder of this year affect that?
The continuing resolution approach will affect some of the maintenance decisions for some of our platforms, but not the construction projects that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thanks to witnesses. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your testimony. We're going to leave the record open for 3 days to take questions for the record. This concludes the meeting.